Mashhadí Faṭṭáḥ. Mashhadí Faṭṭáḥ was personified spirit. He was devotion itself. Brother to Hajj Ali Asghar, of the same pure lineage, through the latter he came into the faith. Like the twins, Castor and Pollux, the two kept together in one spot, and both were illuminated with the light of belief. In all things the two were united as a pair. They shared the same certitude and faith, the same conscience, and made their way out of Azerbaijan to Adrianople, immigrating at the same time. In every circumstance of their life they lived as one individual. Their disposition, their aims, their religion, character, behavior, faith, certitude, knowledge, all were one. Even in the most great prison they were constantly together. Mashhadí Faṭṭáḥ possessed some merchandise. This was all he owned in the world. He had entrusted it to persons in Adrianople, and later on those unrighteous people did away with the goods. Thus, in the pathway of God, he lost whatever he possessed. He passed his days perfectly content in the most great prison. He was utterly selflessness. From him no one ever heard a syllable to indicate that he existed. He was always in a certain corner of the prison, silently meditating, occupied with the remembrance of God, at all times spiritually alert and mindful, in a state of supplication. Then came the supreme affliction. He could not tolerate the anguish of parting with Baha'u'llah, and after Baha'u'llah's passing he died of grief. Blessed is he, again blessed is he. Glad tidings to him, again glad tidings to him. Upon him be the glory of the All-Glorious. Nabíl of Qá'in. This distinguished man, Mullah Muhammad Ali, that is, Nabíl of Qá'in was his title, was one of those whose hearts were drawn to Baha'u'llah before the declaration of the Bab. It was then that he drank the red wine of knowledge from the hands of the cupbearer of grace. It happened that a prince who was the son of Mir Asadullah Khan, Prince of Qá'in, was commanded to remain as a political hostage in Tehran. He was young, far away from his loving father, and Mullah Muhammad Ali was his tutor and guardian. Since the youth was a stranger in Tehran, the Blessed Beauty showed him special kindness. Many a night the young prince was Baha'u'llah's guest at the mansion, and Mullah Muhammad Ali would accompany him. This was prior to the declaration of the Bab. It was then that this chief of all trusted friends was captivated by Baha'u'llah, and wherever he went spread loving praise of him. After the way of Islam, he also related the great miracles which he had, with his own eyes, seen Baha'u'llah perform, and the marvels he had heard. He was in ecstasy, burning up with love. In that condition he returned to Qá'in with the prince. Later on, that eminent scholar, Akh Muhammad of Qá'in, whose title was Nabíl Akbar, was made a Mujtahid, a doctor of religious law, by the late Sheikh Murtaza. He left then for Baghdad, became an ardent follower of Baha'u'llah, and hastened back to Persia. The leading divines and Mujtahids were well aware of and acknowledged his vast scholarly accomplishments, the breadth of his learning, and his high rank. When he reached Qá'in, he began openly to spread the new faith. The moment Mullah Muhammad Ali heard the name of the Blessed Beauty, he immediately accepted the Bab. Quote, "I had the honor," he said, "of meeting the Blessed Beauty in Tehran. The instant I saw him, I became his slave." Unquote. In his village of Sar Chaw, this gifted, high-minded man began to teach the faith. He guided in his own family, and saw to the others as well, bringing a great multitude under the law of the love of God, leading each one to the path of salvation. Up to that time he had always been a close companion of Mir Alam Khan, the governor of Qá'in, and had rendered him important services, and had enjoyed the governor's respect and trust. Now that shameless prince turned against him in a rage on account of his religion, seized his property and plundered it, for the Amir was terrified of Nasir-ed-Din Shah. He banished Nabíl-i-Akhbar and ruined Nabíl of Qá'in. After throwing him in prison and torturing him, he drove him out as a homeless vagrant. To Nabíl, the sudden calamity was a blessing. The sacking of his earthly goods, the expulsion into the desert, was a kingly crown, and the greatest favor God could grant him. For some time he remained in Tehran, to outward seeming a pauper of no fixed abode, but inwardly rejoicing, for this is the characteristic of every soul who is firm in the covenant. He had access to the society of the great, and knew the condition of the various princes. He would therefore frequent some of them, and give them the message. He was a consolation to the hearts of the believers, and as a drawn sword to the enemies of Baha'u'llah. He was one of those whom we read in the Quran, quote, "For the cause of God shall they strive hard, the blame of the blamer shall they not fear." The Quran 5:59. Day and night he toiled to promote the faith, and with all his might to spread abroad the clear signs of God. He would drink and drink again of the wine of God's love, was clamorous as the storm clouds, restless as the waves of the sea. Permission came, then, for him to visit the most great prison, for in Tehran, as a believer, he had become a marked man. They all knew of his conversion. He had no caution, no patience, no reserve. He cared nothing for reticence, nothing for dissimulation. He was utterly fearless and in terrible danger. When he arrived at the most great prison, the hostile watchers drove him off, and try as he might, he found no way to enter. He was obliged to leave for Nazareth, where he lived for some time as a stranger, alone with his two sons, Aka Ghulam Hussein and Aka Ali Akbar, grieving and praying. At last a plan was devised to introduce him into the fortress, and he was summoned to the prison where they had immured the innocent. He came in such ecstasy as cannot be described, and was admitted to the presence of Baha'u'llah. When he entered there and lifted his eyes to the Blessed Beauty, he shook and trembled and fell unconscious to the floor. Baha'u'llah spoke words of loving kindness to him, and he rose again. He spent some days hidden in the barracks, after which he returned to Nazareth. The inhabitants of Nazareth wondered much about him. They told one another that he was obviously a great and distinguished man in his own country, a notable and of high rank, and they asked themselves why he should have chosen such an out-of-the-way corner of the world as Nazareth, and how he could be contented with such poverty and hardship. When, in fulfillment of the promise of the Most Great Name, the gates of the prison were flung wide, and all the friends and travelers could enter and leave the fortress town in peace and with respect, Nabíl of Qá'in would journey to see Baha'u'llah once in every month. However, as commanded by him, he continued to live in Nazareth, where he converted a number of Christians to the faith, and there he would weep by day and night over the wrongs that were done to Baha'u'llah. His means of livelihood was his business partnership with me. That is, I provided him with a capital of 3 crans. Footnote: the kran was 20 shahis, or almost 8 cents. End of footnote. With it he bought needles, and this was his stock in trade. The women of Nazareth gave him eggs in exchange for his needles, and in this way he would obtain 30 or 40 eggs a day, 3 needles per egg. Then he would sell the eggs and live on the proceeds. Since there was a daily caravan between Akka and Nazareth, he would refer to Akka Riza each day for more needles. Glory be to God, he survived 2 years on that initial outlay of capital, and he returned thanks at all times. You can tell how detached he was from worldly things by this one fact. The Nazarenes used to say it was plain to see from the old man's manner and behavior that he was very rich, and that if he lived so modestly, it was only because he was a stranger in a strange place, hiding his wealth by setting up as a peddler of needles. Whenever he came into the presence of Baha'u'llah, he received still more evidences of favor and love. For all seasons he was a close friend and companion to me. When sorrows attacked me, I would send for him, and then I would rejoice just to see him again. How wonderful his talk was, how attractive his society. Bright of face he was, free of heart, loosed from every earthly tie, always on the wing. Toward the end he made his home in the most great prison, and every day he entered the presence of Baha'u'llah. On a certain day, walking through the bazaar with his friends, he met a grave-digger named Haji Ahmad. Although in the best of health, he addressed the grave-digger and laughingly told him, "Come along with me." Accompanied by the believers and the grave-digger, he made for Nabiyullah Salih. Here he said, "O Haji Ahmad, I have a request to make of you. When I move on out of this world and into the next, dig my grave here, beside the purest branch." Footnote, Mirza Medhi, son of Baha'u'llah, who, praying one evening on the barracks roof, fell to his death. End of footnote. "This is the favor I ask." So saying, he gave the man a gift of money. That very evening, not long after sunset, word came that Nabíl of Qá'in had been taken ill. I went to his home at once. He was sitting up and conversing. He was radiant, laughing, joking, but for no apparent reason the sweat was pouring off of his face. It was rushing down. Except for this, he had nothing the matter with him. The perspiring went on and on. He weakened, lay in his bed, and toward morning died. Baha'u'llah would refer to him with infinite grace and loving kindness, and revealed a number of tablets in his name. The Blessed Beauty was wont, after Nabíl's passing, to recall that ardor, the power of that faith, and to comment that here was a man who had recognized him prior to the advent of the Bab. All hail to him for this wondrous bestowal. Blessedness awaiteth him, and a goodly home, and God will single out for his mercy whomsoever he willeth. The Quran 13:28, 2:99, and 3:67. Siyyid Muḥammad-Taqí Mashhadí. Muḥammad-Taqí came from the village of Mashhad. When still young, he learned of the faith of God. In holy ecstasy his mind turned heavenward, and his heart was flooded with light. Divine grace descended upon him. The summons of God so enraptured him that he threw the peace of Manshádí to the winds. Leaving his kinfolk and children, he set out over the mountains and desert plains, passed from one halting place to the next, came to the seashore, crossed over the sea, and at last reached the city of Haifa. From there he hastened on to Acha and entered the presence of Baha'u'llah. In the early days he opened a small shop in Haifa and carried on some trifling business. God's blessing descended upon it, and it prospered. That little corner became the haven of the pilgrims. When they arrived, and again at their departure, they were guests of the high-minded and generous Muḥammad-Taqí. He also helped to manage the affairs of the believers, and would get together their means of travel. He proved unfailingly reliable, loyal, worthy of trust. Ultimately, he became the intermediary through whom tablets could be sent away and mail from the believers could come in. He performed this service with perfect dependability, accomplishing it in a most pleasing way, scrupulously dispatching and receiving the correspondence at all times. Trusted by everyone, he became known in many parts of the world and received unnumbered bounties from Baha'u'llah. He was a treasury of justice and righteousness, entirely free from any attachment to worldly things. He had accustomed himself to a very spare way of life, caring nothing for food or sleep, comfort or peace. He lived all alone in a single room, passed the nights on a couch of palm branches, and slept in a corner. But to the travelers he was a spring in the desert. For them he provided the softest of pillows and the best table he could afford. He had a smiling face, and by nature was spiritual and serene. After the day star of the Supreme Concourse had set, Siyyid Manshádí remained loyal to the covenant, a sharp sword confronting the violators. They tried every ruse, every deceit, all their subtlest expedients. It is beyond imagining how they showered favors on him, and what honors they paid him, what feasts they prepared, what pleasures they offered, all this to make a breach in his faith. Yet every day he grew stronger than before, continued to be staunch and true, kept free from every unseemly thought, and shunned whatever went contrary to the covenant of God. When they finally despaired of shaking his resolve, they harassed him in every possible way and plotted his financial ruin. He remained, however, the quintessence of constancy and trust. When, at the instigation of the violators, Abdul-Hamid began his opposition to me, I was obliged to send Manshádí away to Port Said, because he was widely known among the people as a distributor of our mail. I then had to relay the correspondence to him through intermediaries who were unknown, and he would send the letters on as before. In this way the treacherous and the hostile were unable to take over the mail. During the latter days of Abdul-Hamid, when a commission of investigation appeared, and, urged on by those familiars turned strangers, made plans to tear out the holy tree by the roots, when they determined to cast me into the depths of the sea or banish me to the Fezan, and this was their settled purpose, and when the commission accordingly tried their utmost to get hold of some document or other, they failed. In the thick of all that turmoil, with all the pressures and restraints and the foul attacks of those persons who were pitiless as Yazid, still the mail went through. Footnote: Yazid, son of Muawiyah Umayyad, Caliph by whose order the Imam Hussein was martyred. End of footnote. For many long years Siyyid Manshádí befittingly performed this service in Port Said. The friends were uniformly pleased with him. In that city he earned the gratitude of travelers, placed those who had immigrated in his debt, brought joy to the local believers. Then the heavy heat of Egypt proved too much for him. He took to his bed, and in a raging fever cast off the robe of life. He abandoned Port Said for the kingdom of heaven, and rose up to the mansions of the Lord. Siyyid Manshádí was the essence of virtue and intellect. His qualities and attainment were such as to amaze the most accomplished minds. He had no thought except of God, no hope but to win the good pleasure of God. He was the embodiment of, quote, "Make all my song one single praise of Thee, forever keep me faithful in Thy service," unquote. May God cool his feverish pain with the grace of reunion in the kingdom, and heal his sickness with the balm of nearness to him in the realm of the All-Beauteous. Upon him be the glory of God, the most glorious.